Okay, Sunday morning Kailul. Would like to wish a big mazel tov to Rabbi Chaim Shochat for his birthday tonight in Mitzvah Hashem. He should have a gewaldige year ahead with Hatzlacha and Parnasa and Simcha and Gesund and many years to come, Mitzvah Hashem. Nachas from his children. Why do rabbis think that they have to be funny? That is today's topic, and it's a major debate between the Pnei Yehushua, Rav Yonis and Eibeshitz, the Alter Rebbe, about how significant is Jewish humor. Does Jewish humor actually have any place in the Beis Medrash, in the world of Torah? So, as any chassid would tell you, Simcha is like a breath of oxygen. As important as oxygen is to life, so too is Simcha, being joyful, being happy. If somebody is in a negative mood, all bets are off. What types of success will they have? And it's not just in spiritual service, even in business. Someone walks into the office in a bad mood, they'll probably have a bad day. Walk in a good mood, I'm imagining, right? Is that what happens in the office? You walk in a good mood, you're in a jolly mood, things seem to work out. Simcha, joy. In fact, if you jump to number 15 for a second, just to throw everybody off on the second page, there's a one-liner from the Tzavos Harivash, from the Baal Shem Tov, where the Baal Shem Tov said in number 15, Habechia hura ma'oid. Tears are awful. Tears have no place. Why? Sheha'adam tzarich la'avedes Hashem dafke b'simcha. One has to serve God out of joy. Out of joy. Rak. However, im habechia hi machma simcha. If the tears are due to joy, udveikus Hashem yisbarach, tears of joy, tears of emotion, tears of longing, and it's associated with dveikus to Hashem, oz toivihi ma'id, and it's beautiful. There's very much place for that. So here the Baal Shem Tov says, it all boils down to joy. You're going to cry, you got to make sure it's part of the joy. And as Reb Nachman of Breslov said, mitzvah gedola liyos b'simcha tamid. It's a great mitzvah to be in simcha tamid constantly, and that's, as an enikul of the Baal Shem Tov, that's really the Baal Shem Tov. A person has to always be b'simcha. Although there is a letter of the Nesivos HaMishpat who writes that when do you have to be b'simcha? Only when you serve God. It says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve Hashem with joy. When you serve Hashem, you're happy. But the rest of the time. But in the world of the Baal Shem Tov, a Yid always needs to be b'simcha. And the question is, there's simcha, there's joy, there's happiness, and then there's comedy, and there's laughter. And are the two synonymous, or are the two very different? So let's begin with number one. It's a Gemara Masechta Shabbos, Daf Lamed. It's also on the end of Pesachim. We're coming up to Pesach. And the Gemara says like this, a well-known piece of Gemara. The Gemara says, if you open up a Koheles from King Solomon, V'shibachti aniyas hasimcha, Shloim HaMelech says, I praise joy. What type of joy did he refer to? Simcha shel mitzvah. If it's not just frivolity, but it's simcha shel mitzvah. It's joy associated with the mitzvah. Rashi gives an example, a chasana. The joy which is associated with the mitzvah. But then Shloimeh says as well, Ul simcha mazra oisa. Well, what's this simcha about? As if chastising those that are stam happy. Zu simcha she'eina shel mitzvah. That's when the joy is not associated with the mitzvah. Okay, that's a very simple distinction. Is the joy associated with the mitzvah or not? L'lamedcha, to teach you. She'ein shchina shayra. Shchina does not rest. Loi mitoich atzvus. Not when somebody is in depressed spirits. V'loi mitoich atzvus, when somebody is lazy, is out of strength, lethargic. V'loi mitoich schoik, not out of laughter. V'loi mitoich kalus roish, lightheadedness. V'loi mitoich sicha, and not just out of chatter. V'loi mitoich dvarim b'teilim, neither that. Ella, rather, only mitoich dvar simcha shel mitzvah. The Shechina will only rest if there's joy and mitzvah type of joy. Shenemar, what's the source? Elisha needed prophecy and he wasn't receiving it, and he said, Va'ata now, kechuli menagin, bring me a musician. V'haya kenagin hamenagin, when the musician would play the music, v'atihi alav yad Hashem, the Eibishter rested upon him. So you see that you want the Shechina to rest on you, joy. As the well-known story with Reb Shlomo Tzashniker, the chassid of the Alter Rebbe, he traveled to the Alter Rebbe and he asked for a mimer. And the Alter Rebbe said, you think you just come and ask for a mimer? Not ready to say a mimer. And he and a number of chassidim sat dejected outside the Alter Rebbe's room. And Reb Shlomo Tzashniker had an instrument, maybe it was a violin, and he played it, and the chassidim were singing a beautiful melody, a niggin. And then the Alter Rebbe exited his room and he quoted this pasuk, that v'hoya kenagin hamenagin v'atihi alav yad Hashem. Now that there's music, there can be the Shechina can rest, and the Alter Rebbe said a mimer for them. Amar Rav Yehuda v'chein l'dvar halacha. Said Rav Yehuda, so too for a dvar halacha. Meaning the correct way to approach a dvar halacha. You're about to learn something. It's not dvarim b'teilim, it's not sicha, like all the things that we just did. None of that. Rather simcha shel mitzvah. Hold on. Amar Rabba said, rather the chaim l'chaloim tov. You want to have a good dream? If you go to sleep in a rotten mood, then you can't expect to have fantastic dreams. You want a pleasant dream, you go to bed in good spirits. Simcha. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. Eini, it's not true, or ini, is it true? You're telling me that the way to approach learning is through joy, simcha shel mitzvah, through happiness? Don't you know what Rav Gidl said in the name of Rav? Kol Talmud Chacham, Sheyoshev lifnei Rabbi, any scholar that sits before his master, ve'ein sifsoisav noit v'smar, and his lips are not dripping with bitterness, tichvena should be burned. Shenemar sifsoisav shoshanim noit v'smar over, which means his lips are roses and they're dripping herbs. But al tikri mar over, elamar over, there's bitterness, and al tikri shoshanim roses, elo sheshonim, meaning that they learn. The lips of the student need to be trembling out of fear, right? As every teacher impresses upon his students. Don't get so comfortable, don't lean back, don't slouch in your chair, sit up like a bench. So what's going on? So says the Gemara, loy kasha, it's not a kasha. Ha berabba v'ha betalmud. The student needs to be trembling. The Rebbe is laughing. The Rebbe is in a good mood. These days it's the other way around, right? The students come in and they're having the time of their lives, and the Rebbe is like, oh yeah. Anyhow, but back in the day, somehow that is the other way around. The students came in like a mensch, and the Rebbe was actually, and when that happens, by the way, and all the students are sitting there, menschlichkeit, then the Rebbe comes in and he can actually smile. He can actually be in a good mood. He can be pleased with what he sees. That's answer number one. The boys ema, answer number two. Hava ha-berabba, both are talking about the master. Both statements that the master has to be serious, quivering, and he needs to be jolly, simcha shel mitzvah, are both true. V'loi kasha, it's not, it depends when. Ha-mekamei de livsach, ha-labasa de pasach. One is before the shir, one is right after he begins. Before you begin the shir, you got to come in smiling. Once the shir begins, your business has begun, seriousness. Kihad de Rabba, like Rabba, mikamei de pasach luhul de Rabbanim. Before he opened shir to the rabbis, Amr, he said milsa de bedichusa. He said something. Bedichusa on the surface means comical, something funny, and not just that. Ubodchi Rabbanim, the rabbis laughed. Often a rabbi says a joke and people don't laugh. But when Rabba said a joke, Bodchi Rabban and the rabbis taka laughed. But L'Soif, after that was done, at the end, Yosef Be'emsa Rabba himself, Yosef is singular, it refers to Rabba. He himself sat Be'emsa with fear, Upasach B'Shmaita started the shir. So Rabba's conduct serves as the second answer of the Gemara. Yeah, the Rebbe himself is in a jolly mood right before you begin. Once, and he even said a milsa de b'dichusa, something sharp, something cute, something funny. We'll see more about that. And then once the shir began, boom, he sat be'ema. That is what the Gemara says. So if somebody would ask, is there any room for jokes in the Beis Medrash? You would say, yeah, right before the shir starts, as a preamble to the shir. Rashi in the Gemara says, what's the purpose? Rashi says it opens the heart. It opens the heart of the students. It opens the heart of the students. Join me in number 6 for a second. It's a Gemara in Chulin. It's a Gemara in Chulin. The Mishnah says if somebody is shechting and he starts to shecht and then he drops the knife, you know, or his pants fall down and he has to pick up his clothes. Yeah. So it could be a major issue. If you wait too long, then the shechit is going to be invalid, because the pshat is, it's like, if you half shechted it, it's now become a treifa, right? So if you walk away and come back a half hour later and you finish the shechita, you're shechting a treifa. It needs to be one act. So then the question is, how long could you wait between the beginning of the act and the end? The shehiyah, how long could you wait? So the Gemara, the Mishnah says, Kedei shechita, as long as it would take to shecht. As long as it would take to shecht another animal, which isn't that long. So that's what, so the Gemara says, my kedei shchita, the Mishnah says kedei shchita. Omar Rav, we're number 6, kedei shchitas behem acheres, however long it would take to shecht another animal. So Rav Khan and Rav Ashi asked Rav, hold on, is there a difference if you're shechting an animal versus a bird? Do I say kedei shchitas behema lebehema v'oif la'oif? Do I say if you're shechting an animal, the amount you can wait is to shecht another animal? But a bird, it's to shecht another bird, which is much a smaller time. Or maybe we're always lenient. Maybe af behema la'oif. Maybe even for a bird, you have the amount of time for the animal. So Amar Lahu, Rav said, you know what? I don't know. Lo yahava badichne bei bechavivi. I wasn't in a good spirit / joking vibe with Chavivi, with my Chavivi refers to his uncle Rab Chia. Rav was a nephew of Rab Chia. Rab Chia was a half brother, both of Rav's father and of Rav's mother. Both Rav's father and Rav's mother were half brothers, half siblings, of Rabbi Chia. And the Rav was very close to him. And Rav says, I wasn't bedichne, baby. I couldn't ask him. In other words, so the bedichne doesn't have to mean we weren't in a joking mood. It means we weren't in a hamish, you know, when things are rigid, you're kind of afraid. Sometimes you're afraid, Bochem, to ask Rosh Hashiva Shaila, right? But when you see he's in a happy, hamish mood, it's much more comfortable. Which means that one of the purposes for the teacher to open up with the Milsa de Bedichase is to kind of break the ice, kind of remove the distance between the master and the students, in order the students should feel comfortable to ask questions. Like it says in Pirkei Avos, Lo yabayishin lamed, if you're embarrassed, it's hard, you won't be able to, you'll never ask. And the captain who's in a severe mood can't really teach. There's no interaction. And like Rav said, the air wasn't, the vibes weren't right. I wasn't comfortable to ask Rabbi Chia, and therefore he didn't have the answer to this question. So that's one idea for the Rebbe, to open up the Milsa de Bedichase, just to create a little relationship between the teacher and the students. You should feel comfortable to ask. But Rashi says the reason is you open with a joke to put the students in the right frame of mind. Right frame of mind. Now, throughout Gemara, there happens to be a certain Amora who was infamous, notorious for his sense of humor. And his name was Rabumia. The Gemara says in Baba Basra, in Daf Chav Gimel, that they were discussing in Beis Medrash a Mishnah, which speaks about if a dove is found near its nest, do I automatically assume it belongs to the owner of that nest? Maybe it flew from a different nest. How do you know when you find a dove in the middle of nowhere, maybe it belongs to the finder? And the Mishnah says if the dove is found within 50 yamas of the nest, you know it came from that nest. Or at least it's certain enough that you have to return it to that person, owner of the nest. So Rabbi Yirmiyah famously, yes, well, a bird has 2 legs, right? What if one leg's within 50 yamas and the other leg's on the other side of 50 yamas? So the Gemara says they threw him out of the Beis Medrash. They threw him out. Rashi says because he was just, he's like these what if questions, you know, you have, but what if, get out of here, get out of here. Anyhow, he was expelled. Suspended, I should say.
The text says because it's impossible.
Right. So Tosfos does give a pshat that he was malig al divrei chachamim because Tosfos does give another pshat. So the fact is, he was thrown out. When did he come back? In the end of Baba Basra and Kuf Samachay, around there. So it's 140 daf later, he reappears. They had a Shailim based medrash. The Gemara has many versions of what the question was. It was about testimony. And they wanted to ask Rabumia. And the Rashbam says that even while Rebbe Yirmiyah had been, was suspended from the base medrash, he wasn't allowed in, they would still send him questions. Because with his sense of humor, he was a very sharp mind. And to this particular question, he responded, I don't know why you're asking me, I'm just a little student, but I'll tell you what I think. And they liked his response so much, they brought him back in. The Gemara says, they brought him back in. So they asked Rav Pinchas Hershprung from Montreal, how long was Rabbi Yirmiyah expelled for? Now Rav Pinchas Hershprung was highly critical of the Litvischer way of learning, where you learn like one blot a month, be'iyun. Rav Pinchas Hershprung liked the Polish way. You cover many, many pages, you're always on the move. So Rav Pinchas said, listen, he left in Daf Chav Gimel, he's brought back in Daf Kuf Samachay. If it was a Litvischer yeshiva, he was thrown out for 10 years. A Chiddush yeshiva, 3 weeks. So in number 2, Rabbi Yirmiyah is back at it. It's a Gemara in Niddah, where Rabbi Meir, the Tanur Rabbi Meir says, if a woman gives birth to a fetus, which unfortunately this fetus, something went horribly wrong, and is completely deformed to the point that it looks like an animal. God forbid, all types of things can happen. Hashem yishmerenu. But Rab Meir says that it's considered a child to the point that the woman has all the tumah, the dinim of impurity that are associated with childbirth. So number 2, I guess it's a somber topic, so Rabbi Yirmiyah wanted to lighten up the mood. So what did he do? Ba minei Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zera. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah is the guy with the sense of humor. We're going to see Rabbi Zera was the opposite. He's Mr. Rigid. Okay? And he said, according to Rabbi Meir, who says, if the animals in the mother's womb, in other words, if what?
He did get shafted. A little less mirth,
a fetus that looks like an animal. Rabbi Meir says, Vlad Ma'al Yuhu, that it's a real child as far as dinim of childbirth. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, what if somebody kibul ba'a via kiddushin mahu? What if somebody gave, after the child's born, if somebody gave money to the father of the child to wed? Before a child is bas mitzvah, you can give the money to the father to wed the child. So could somebody wed this thing, which looks like an animal? In other words, is it really a girl? So they asked him, "My nafkamina, what nafkamina is?" Like, what type? So he said, "No." He had a good question. Litzuri ba'achaysa. If the kiddushin takes effect, then he won't be able to marry this. This baby might have a sister, which is a regular girl, but once you're mekadosh one girl, you can never marry the other sister unless the first person passes away. So the Gemara says, that question is based on the fact that this fetus will live on, because if it doesn't, anyways you could live with the sister. But Frek the Gemara, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Loi Amar Rav Meir Elohaylu b'minoi miskayim. The pshat in Rav Meir, so imagine you have this baby that God forbid comes out looking like whatever type of animal. Since had it been that type of animal, literally, it would have lived on. So although now it can't because it's truly a human, it's considered a child as far as childbirth laws. But it itself cannot live. So what's Rabbi Yirmiyah doing? So Almar Rav Acher Bayankiv, you don't get it. Ad kan heviu Rabbi Yirmiyah leRab Zera l'deich gichuch. Rabbi Yirmiyah was trying to make Rabbi Zera laugh. This whole conversation was just Rabbi Yirmiyah trying to get Rabbi Zera to laugh. V'loi gachich, but he wouldn't laugh. Rabbi Zera would not laugh. He would not crack a smile. He would not crack a smile. So look at number 5 for a second. This is a Gemara in Brachas. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Asur la'adam shimalas chayk piv ba'olam hazeh. Rashbi said it's asur for a person to fill his mouth with laughter in this world. Shenemar oz yimales chayk pinu. Then in the future, chayk will fill our mouths. U'lashaneinu rina. Amosai when? when the pasuk says that the goyim will say Higdal Hashem La'aseh Shemela, like when the goyim will say God was great to the Jews in the messianic times in the future, that's when our mouths will be full of laughter. But otherwise it's also, otherwise it's forbidden. Otherwise it's forbidden. This is there happens to be a shaila. This din is quoted in the laws of in Orach Chaim about Avelus of Churban Beis Hamikdash. It sounds like this is a prohibition that since the Beis Hamikdash is no longer, that's why one has no right to fill his mouth with laughter. But the expression of Ba'olam Hazeh, right, arena, right. Okay, so, but no, this issue of Yimolas Chayk Piv still exists, but you have to know when to apply it. But it's Rashbi said Ba'olam Hazeh in this world. If he means Bizman Agolus, he should have just said from when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. He doesn't. He says Ba'olam Hazeh. So Rabbeinu Yoina. Right. Okay, no, it could have been said as a prophecy for the future. You know, Hayragnu Kol Hayoim was also said about the future, about the Churban. Kapitel Chav Beis was about the future, about Esther. So that could be. Rabbeinu Yoina said, but it says Ba'olam Hazeh. It's mashma b'chalal in Olam Hazeh. You can never fill your mouth with laughter. So that's a debate if it's only Zman HaGolus or b'chalal Olam Hazeh. But that's what Rashbi says. The Gemara says, number 5, the last 2 lines, they said about Reish Lakish, Shemiyom of his entire life, he did not fill his mouth with joy, with laughter, with laughter, from when he heard it from Rabbi Yochanan, his master, right? Rashbi said it, but Rabbi Yochanan quoted it. When Reish Lakish was Rabbi Yochanan's student and brother-in-law heard this, he ceased to allow laughter and tzchok to fill his mouth. Which, by the way, the Ben Ish Chai asks, I'm sure Reish Lakish filled many of the instructions of Rabbi Yochanan. Why do we point this out? So the Ben Ish Chai says Reish Lakish was a badchen. Reish Lakish was a comedian. Reish Lakish was a comedian. We know Reish Lakish, for many years he had the profession of a ganav. According to Taisus, originally he was a good bacher in yeshiva, and later, later he became a ganav, and then he sprang back. But says the Ben Ish Chai, he was a funny man, and that's why it's a big deal that when he heard from Rabbi Yochanan, that it's also to fill your mouth with tzchok. The fact that from that point on he held himself back from laughing was a big deal, because he was a badchen. Some people ask on the Ben Ish Chai, but how do you know he was a badchen? But because you have a kash in the Gemara why we mention Reish Lakish and not laughing, you can create the fact that he was a comedian. You have to have some more evidence. Well, the truth is the Kabbalists say Reish Lakish was a Gilgul of Yishmael. And Yishmael was mitzachik, the pasuk says. Yishmael was mitzachik. Everything was a joke for Yishmael. He was mitzachik. And that explains Reish Lakish's affinity towards comedy. And that's the reason the Gemara says, nonetheless, when he heard from Rabbi Yochanan, it's Asur, no longer did he allow laughter to fill his mouth. But upon him, you see from this Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rashbi, that you really can't fill your mouth with laughter. So go to number 3, is Rashi on the Gemara in Nida. Why was Rab Zera so rigid? He didn't allow himself to come lidei gichuch to laughter. Says Rashi, Schok, Rabbi Yirmiyah tried as hard as he could that Rab Zera should crack a laugh, crack a smile. B'chol tachbulas hal, with all of these ways. Also, Rabbi Yirmiyah tried lahavi Rab Zera l'dei schok, Rab Zera should crack a smile. V'loi sachak, he didn't laugh. Why? Because it's asur la'adam shimala piv schok. Don't you know the Gemara number 5 says Rashi? It's asur to fill your mouth. Rab Zera machmir tfei. Rab Zera wouldn't crack a smile at all. In other words, Rabbi Yirmiyah wanted to crack a smile. It's also to fill your mouth with laughter. Okay, that's not going to happen with Rabbi Zera, but at least Abissal. Nah, Rabbi Zera was super machmir. Not even a hint of laughter. If you look at number 4, it's another Gemara in Brachos that says another account between the same characters. Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah have a Yosef Kamed Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah was sitting in front of Rabbi Zera. Chazya to have a kabodach tuva. And Rabbi Zera saw Rabbi Yirmiyah is in too jolly a mood. Chazya to have a kabodach tuva that Rabbi Zera saw Rabbi Yirmiyah was badach, he was too happy to Armalei said, don't you know the pasuk b'chol etzev yeh meiser, that you gain from seriousness, from atzvus, a little bit of seriousness in your life won't kill you. On the contrary, it'll help you gain. So Armalei said, I'm not tefillin manachna. I said, I put on tefillin. I'm so happy by the fact that I put on tefillin. Or he was telling him, I'm wearing tefillin, so that itself will keep me in check. I won't go overboard. But either way, you see that it's again, Rabbi Zera is making sure Rabbi Yirmiyah, so Rabbi Zera is making sure Rabbi Yirmiyah doesn't smile too much. Rabbi Yirmiyah tries to get Rabbi Zera to crack a smile he wants. He had this interesting, that's Rabbi Yirmiyah. But we began with number one, with Rabba. Rabba is the master of the milsa, the b'dechusa, the master of the jokes. So let's assume for now that the joke here is a literal joke. It's interesting that Dafka Rabba, the Gemara that we have in Shabbos says Rabba, the same Gemara in Pesachim says Rabba. Rabbeinu Hananel's version in Pesachim says Rava, with an aleph. And there's in the Yalkut Shemaini, the story is also brought, it also says Rava. The Alter Rebbe in Tanyan Perek Zayin brings it in the name of Rava. And we'll see later an incredible sikha where the Rebbe discussed that it's probably true by both, and the Rebbe discusses why the Gemara says Rabba, why the Alter Rebbe chose Rava. Maybe we'll throw it in at the end. Okay. But the classic Gemara is Rabba, and it's usually quoted as Rabba. And the shaila is, why Dafka Rabba from all people? Why was it him? So, if you look in number 8, the Gemara in Moed Katan says, let me tell you something about Rabba. It's actually Rava commenting. Now, Rava is a student of Rabba. Rabba is 3rd generation of Amei Royim. So you have like Rav and Shmuel, generation number 1 with Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Generation number 2 in Bavel. In Bavel you have the great Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna. They were the greatest of the next generation, number 2. And then in generation number 3 you have Rabba who learned from Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna. Rabba's generation number 3. He's together with Rav Yosef, his pal is always arguing with. And they in turn, both Rabba and Rav Yosef were teachers of Abaya and Rava. Abaya and Rava, generation number 4, they learned both by Rabba and by Rav Yosef. So, Rava is commenting in number 8 in Moed Katan. Rava is saying that Bonai having children and health and parnasa, all these things depend on mazel, on your fate when you're born. It does not depend on schusim. It's a big debate and there's a huge discussion. Now's not the time to get into it. It's suffice to say it's not exactly as simple as that. Even Rava may agree that certain mitzvahs can change your fate. But Rava says, I'll prove it to you, proofs in the pudding. Rabba and Rav Chisda, Travayu, both of them Rabbanan were number 8. Rabbanan said they're both righteous rabbis. Mar Matzli, one would daven and rain would come, the other davened and rain also came. Rav Chisda lived 92 years, a long life. Rabba lived 40. Rabba only lived 40 years. Bei Rav Chisda Shitin Iluli, in the house of Rav Chisda there were 60 simchas, 60 weddings. In the house of Rabba Shitin Tichli there were 60 avelison. 60 people passed from his family. Bei Rav, in the house of Rav Chisda Smido Lekalbi, there was so much fine flour for the dogs. The dogs wouldn't even ask. They were so full they wouldn't even ask for it. In the house of Rabba, Na'am Desori Le'inchi, the people would ask for some barley bread, V'loi Mishtakach, and there wasn't. Rabba was extremely poor. Rav Chisda was wealthy. Rav Chisda had a long life. Rabba died very young. Rav Chisda married 60 simchas. Rabba had 60 avelison. So say, what's Rava trying to prove from here? You see that you're saying Schusim, Rabba had the same Schusim as Rav Chisda. It's mazel. It's the fate of how you're born. It's the destiny that you're born with. Va'amar Rava said, Heni tlas mili boy kamishmar. There were 3 things I asked from God, for myself. Tarti Yov, the two were given to me. Chada, one, Lo Yovli, one wasn't. I asked for the Chachma of Rav Huna. I asked Usrei for the wealth of Rav Chisda. V'Yovli, and I got it. So Rava was well-to-do, and he was very clever. I asked for the Anivus Nusa, for the humility of Rabba bar Rav Huna. Rav Huna's son Rabba was very humble. I asked for that, but Lo Yov I didn't get.
The same Rabba?
No. Oh, the famous Rabba is Rabba bar Nachmani. Rabba bar Nachmani. This is Rabba bar Rav Huna. So you see, Rava said 3 things I asked from God, 2 I got, 1 I didn't. Rava was wealthy, in contrast to his Rebbe Rabba, who was not. So what do you see from that Gemara? Rabba had it tough. There was nothing, he couldn't feed people in his house. Everyone's dying, and he himself died young, so he's probably ill. Look at number 9, a well-known Gemara in the end of Shabbos. The Gemara there is talking about giving eulogies. Amalei Abaya asked his teacher Rabba, Kagoin mar you, the sonu le kulu Pumpadissa, the entire Pumpadissa despises you. Rabba was a Rav in Pumpadissa, and he was thoroughly despised by the people there. The men of Pumpadissa had flawed character, unscrupulous fellows, and they gave him a hard time. Rabba used to be meichiach them. Rabba would tell them off. Rabba would rebuke them for their ways, and they did not appreciate it. So Abaya tells his teacher Rabba that the entire city despises you. So what's going to be man achim hespeda? Who's going to give a warm and heartfelt eulogy? No one cares about it. They're going to be happy that you're gone. So Rabba said, Mistaya, it's enough for me that you and Rabba bar Rav Chanan. If you, Abaya, and Rabba, the son of Rav Chanan, eulogize me, that's enough for me. The rest of the town doesn't bother me. So Rabba was a despised person. Nebuch. No one liked the guy. Abaya also says about him in Masechta Sukkah that Rabba never slept. He barely slept. He had to sleep like a horse, constantly waking up. So that probably didn't help his barely sleeping. He's unwell. He died young. Nobody likes him. 60 burials. He has no money. His life was difficult. You can imagine Rabba coming in to give shir. He needed a joke. He needed something to enliven his spirits. So maybe it was for him more than for his students. So it's just interesting to think that Rabba is the man of comedy, and Rab Zera, the Gemara says, is the stiff man. Hey, Rabbi Yirmiyah tried all they could, Rab Zera wouldn't laugh. So you have to imagine that Purim Suda, right? When Rabba got Rab Zera drunk, finally trying to, get some laughter out of him, and he killed him. But you can imagine Rabba says, next year come and join me. Rabba is the funny, come and just do it again. Rab Zera did not find that comment very funny, right? Rab Zera does not laugh. He does not find that right? It's like the funny guy and the straight man. That's what Rabba and Rab Zera is. However, don't get carried. Don't think that Rabba was. Look at number 10. It's a Gemara in Brachas. Amar Rav Ada bar Masna Amar Rabba. Rabba said, the pasuk in Tehillim says, "V'gilu bir Ada." Gilu means you should rejoice. Bir Ada means while you tremble. So Rabba said, how do you have both together? B'makom gila sham tehera Ada. With the rejoicing, you tremble as well. So Rabba, there is a mitigating factor over here. The joy can't be unbridled. It needs to be together with, it needs to be kept in check with seriousness. And then the Gemara says a story. Abaya in number 10, Abaya v'Yosef kamei de Rabba. Abaya was sitting in front of Rabba, his teacher. Chazir, Rabba saw that Abaya was too happy. And Omri said, V'gilu biradoksiv. Rabba said, you can't be unbridled joy. You got to keep yourself in check. He said, I'm not tefillin menach, I'm wearing tefillin. Same as the story before. Now the truth is, Abaya rarely wore tefillin because Abaya had major problems in his stomach. He rarely wore tefillin, and that's why he was so happy he wore tefillin. He's like, Abaya had big problems with his stomach. So you see, that's not exactly as advertised. Rabbi says you have to have the ra'ada as well.
It's advertised. It's just not foolishness.
Okay.
Not unbridled.
Okay. Fine. Point taken. In number 11 is a Gemara in Tainus. And soon we'll see how everything may change. This is still just seeing it from the Talmud's point of view. A Gemara in Tainus has a famous story of Heni Trei Badchi, the famous two comedians, right? The two Jewish comedians. Rabroika was in the marketplace speaking to Elijah the prophet. He asked Elijah, anybody here in the market is heading to the world to come? Sa'ad hachi v'hachi, while they were talking, also henech trei, two people came. The next word is ossi. Some say it's supposed to be achi, two brothers came. And Eliyahu told Rabroika, henech nami, these two people, b'nei alma da'asinu, they belong in the world to come. So Ozil, he went to them and he asked him, Mayuv Daichel, what do you do? What's your occupation? And they said, Inchi baduchuni anan, we're comedians. Mevadchinon atzivi, and we give comedy to those that are in a depressed state. So we uplift people's spirits. Inami, another pshat, ki chazim, when we see two people have a tigra, have a fight between themselves, tarchinon vavdinon luhu shalma, we make peace between them through our comedy, through our jokes. They make peace between people through their jokes, and they lift up people's spirits. And these Trei Badchi, they're going straight to Gan Eden. Why? Not because of, could be they did other mitzvahs, but that wasn't the Gemara said it's because of them uplifting people's spirits. There was a great Chassidic Rebbe, the Baruch of Mezhebush, the Baal Shem Tov's grandson, who was one of the early great Chassidic masters, and it was known that he had a very serious streak to him. Some would say it appeared melancholic, but you don't want to say that about a Rebbe. Very serious, stern, and the Chassidim felt that they need to do something to uplift his spirits. So they hired a fellow by the name of Reb Herschel of Ostropolia, Reb Herschel Ostropolia, to be a comedian for him. And Reb Herschel, apparently the story is, he went into the room of Reb Baruch. Reb Baruch was sitting and learning by the table, and Reb Herschel came in with a candle, and he was like crawling on the floor looking for something. And Reb Baruch looks at him and says, like, what are you doing? So he says, Ich hab gehört, dass der Rebbe's Ponim seien herabgefallen. I heard that the Rebbe's face fell, and I'm looking for it.
Right.
So Reb Baruch smiled. So and that began the beginning of the famous career of Herschel Ostropolia. Maybe to some degree. Shmuel Munkus was a great tzaddik. Mr. Herschel was also a great yid. Yeah, sure, I'm sure he was a great yid. We know that Isaac Homler, who was a great Gaon and an incredible Baal Chassidus, was also a badchen. By weddings, he would get up and he would do his routine, a stand-up routine, whatever it was. I'm sure it was Torah-oriented, but it was badchonos, no question, it was badchonos. So at one particular wedding, there was a big crowd, and Rabbi Isaac Homler got up and he started. I mean, he was a brilliant mind, right? So the sharper somebody is he gives a whole beautiful spice to the humor. And there was a Litvische fellow there who couldn't take this. He had never seen this before by his weddings, and he let it out on the Chassidim. He says, this is Chassidus. You have people get up and say jokes. This is what Chassidus gains. This is the accomplishment. And he really gave it to them. Now, one of these Chassidim says, why don't you go have a word with that comedian? Discuss with him some Gemara. Maybe he knows a thing or two. So the Litvische guy went, and he spoke to the Rabbi Isaac, who was an incredible Talmud Chacham, and the Litvische fellow was flabbergasted. So he came back to the group of Chassidim, and he started screaming again. You have such Talmud Chachamim, and you let them be Badchanim?
Can't win.
Exactly. Anyhow, so from all the above, it would seem that there is place in the Beis Medrash, there's place in Yiddishkeit and Torah for humor, if it's for the right reasons. However, in number 12 comes the Pnei Yehushua and flips everything on its face. The Pnei Yehushua, who passes away in 1756, so in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, he's older than the Baal Shem Tov, and a well-known story of how he sent the Maggid of Mizrich to study by the Baal Shem Tov. But in his introduction to Masechta Ksuvos, he says the following in number 12. Lefi is deity, to me it seems how bizarre is it to explain literally that Rabba said a milsa de b'dichusa mamish, what he said, a joke, b'mili de b'dichi. He said a good rabbi's joke. He said, "Movad shum muksemadas." First of all, it's just it's repulsive, and it's obviously incorrect that Rabba before the shir he would start. There are different ways to start a shir. We just had in Megillah the Gemara as a whole arichas about different Amoraim when they would give shir on Megillah Esther, and the Gemara discusses what their preamble, what the introduction would be. It was always some agadata, some interesting agadata to pull the students into the shir. No one ever said a joke. You want to start off with something lighter. It doesn't have to be a joke. It could be other part of Torah, something interesting. The Magid of Mizrich, there's a tradition that when he would say Chassidus, there was a time that he would first quote a part of Mesilas Yesharim from the Ramchal, which had come out not too long before. He would quote a bit of Mesilas Yesharim, and then he would say the Maimer to contrast. The purpose was for contrasting Musar and Chassidus. So there's many ways to begin a shir. Says the Pnei Yehushua. You think Rabba was beginning with a joke? Can't be. Eli says, "B'lav b'chlal." The Gemara number 1 proves it can't be a joke. Lo yitachan lefarish can't be. Da'amaisi lo hamilsa. The Gemara quotes Rabba's story on what it said above, that the Shechina doesn't rest if you have schoik, or kalos roish, or sichot dvarim b'telem. Right? The Gemara said that the Shechina is the same as. There are 3 things you have to be happy for: Shechina, a dream, and Dvar Halacha. By the way, the Ben Ish Chai says, Simcha is Rosh Hashanah, Simcha, the Shin is Shechina, the Mem and Ches is Marech Haloim, and the Hey is Halacha. There are 3 things that require Simcha before, and Simcha is Rosh Hashanah, those 3 things: Shechina, Marech Haloim, and Halacha. But the Gemara said that Shechina won't rest. Laughter, kalos roish, sicha dvarim b'teilim, that's jokes. Only mitoich dvar simcha shel mitzvah, which Rashi had given an example. Simchas chasam v'kala is when the simcha itself is a mitzvah. And the Gemara then said, Rabbi Yehuda said, so too dvar halacha needs to have the same introduction as Shechina. And the Gemara asked, Eini is quoting the Gemara that Rav Gidl said, anytime a chacham in front of his master, right, the lips have to tremble. And the Gemara said, no. Ha mekamei de liftach. Ha lebasa de pasach. Once you begin, there's trembling, but beforehand, there's joy. And then we quote Rabba's story. But says the Pnei Yehushua, if you remember the Gemara number 1, you'll see clearly we're comparing the Dvar Halacha to the Shechina. Both of them need to have the introduction of joy, but the joy is not kalos roish, it's not sicha, it's not schoik. It's not schoik. Schoik is laughter. Last time we checked. So says the Pnei Yehushua, Im Kain, we're number 12, about 10 lines. In Mashma Lahedya, that before he would begin, that's when Rav Yehuda said, V'chein l'dvar halacha, that you need to have joy, it means before you begin, which is like the story of Rabba. And Rashi says you have to begin b'mili d'bedichusa b'reisha, fine. But v'im kain, you can't say that mili b'dichusa is mamish mili d'bedichi b'mili da'alma. You can't say with stam jokes. Because Adarabba, the Gemara equates that the preamble to learning is the same as the preamble to the Shechina, which is Simcha Shel Mitzvah. Adarabba, we said before, you can't start b'dvar halacha mitoich echad mikol elu, and for sure a joke that is kula l'griyusa, for sure a joke which is schoik, it's kalos roish, it's sich and dvar, you get 4 strikes. Ela al karch, says the Pnei Yehushua, you know what pshat is? You have to say milsa de b'dichusa. It needs to be Simcha Shel Mitzvah, that's what it's talking about. So I can explain in 2 ways. Either he says, Milsa de B'dichusa is also Divrei Torah. It was also words of Torah. But it was something sharp. It was a sharp vort. That's Simcha Shel Mitzvah. Because it's Torah, but it gladdens the heart. Because he told his students something which wasn't according to halacha, but something to sharpen them. Like you find, B'kama Duchti, B'Rabba Gufi, we say, V'Rabba L'chidudi L'Aba Yehuda Ovid. The Gemara says quite a few times in Shas, that Rabba told Abaye something which was not halachically correct, but it was just to sharpen, it was something sharp, and it was to test him, something cute. For example, the Gemara says in Brachos that there was somebody who went chazan, and he said, Okel, Hagodol, Hagibur, V'Hanoira, and started giving all these other accolades to the Eibishter. And Rabba said, wow, what a beautiful chazan. And Abaye said, what do you mean, Rabba? There's a Mishnah that says you can't say anything more in Okel, Hagodol, Hagibur, V'Hanoira. You can't add anything. So what was Rabba saying? There was a good chazan. So Gemara said Rabba just wanted to test Abaye. Rabba would say these comments, he would throw out these things just to see if Abaye is on his game. The Gemara says that many times. Said the Pnei, it's the same Rabba. It's the same Rabba. You find time and time again that Rabba was l'chidudi. He would say things to sharpen Abaye's mind. So he probably did it with his other students as well. That's what milsa de b'dichusa means. He would say a riddle, maybe a Torah riddle. You know, the Ogur who lived 600 years ago. So the Ogur is a sefer of halacha, but in the back he wrote a whole section of riddles, halachic riddles, interesting halachic riddles. For example, one of them is an easy one. He says, you can give a person $1 and cause him to lose 1,000. You can take $1 from a person and give him 1,000. Who am I? What am I? That's a riddle. The answer is, if somebody has 200 coins, they cannot take tzedakah. So if he has 200 and you take one coin away, he's 199, he's eligible for tzedakah. He could take even 1,000 at one shot. But if someone has 199 and you give him one, he's no longer eligible for any tzedakah. And all these types of interesting riddles. So says the Ben Ish Chai also wrote a whole sefer of interesting riddles. There's you see, it's a riddle, it's Torah. It doesn't, and punkt that one is halacha. It doesn't have to be halacha, or it doesn't have to be according to halacha. It could be a savara. It puts a smile on the person's face. Says a Pnei Shur, that's simcha shel mitzvah. It's Torah, and it makes and it gives you a chuckle. That's gewaldik. V'chol, and even that was mekamei de pasach. Even that was before the shir began. After the shir began, have a Yosef be'em. So now there's no more chuckling. Now was v'kamagmiluhu agmuri, and the rest of the shir was lasuk ishmaita libed hilchasa. The rest of the shir was halacha proper. The preamble was something, maybe it's not halacha, something interesting, something sharp, a little pepper to spice up the beginning of the shir. That's option number one, says the Pnei Shur. Or I'll tell you, Heni mili de b'dichusa. You know what it means, simcha shel mitzvah? It's mili da agadata. He would start with agadata. An interesting drasha on a pasuk, something, agadata which gladdens a person's heart. Because we know agada means to pull. Agada meisheches li, like v'higada, we had a shir last year by Shabbos Hagadol. V'higada tolavincha means to pull. You have to tell something to a child that will capture his attention. Captures, you have to pull him. Agada means to pull, like gudachis, gudasik. It's meisheches, it draws a person's heart to Torah. So the second pshat is, he told them some agadata. Like you find in Gemara that it says about many people, before the shir, he said an Indian of agadata, that you find all the time. Those are the Pnei Shur's two options, but to say it's a joke, impossible.
Not that anyone earlier say it's not a joke. Could be that's how everyone learned the shot, right? You know what?
The Meiri on the Gemara seems to learn very clearly it was a joke. I didn't get it on the paper, but the Meiri on the Gemara seems to learn very clearly that it was a joke. Who else says similar to this? In Prague, Praha. So the Noida Yehuda, the great rabbi of Cheskalanda of Prague, he had a student known as the Tshuva Ma'ava, Rabbi Lozer Fleckels. The Tshuva Ma'ava, it sounds like a Chassidic sefer. He was no chassid by any means. He was, he had his issues with Chassidus. That's fine. The Tshuva Ma'ava, the great Tshuva Ma'ava, in his introduction to the Tshuva Ma'ava, he also quotes that, it's like in his introduction, right? So, what do you do before you start your sefer? You should have a whole page of jokes, right? Milsa de b'dichusa. So he says it can't be. He says, you think Rabba needed to make his Talmidim happy with a joke? Torah makes you happy. Pekudei Hashem Yisharm. Nothing makes you mesamech leiv like Torah. If someone's in a bad mood, fakir, teach him a word. Or put him a good. We think the joke will accomplish more than the Torah itself. Can't be. Can't be. No, so he has actually a very chassidish pshat. He says, if you stam learn, you could be doing it for intellectual gymnastics. You want to become a chacham. You like the discussion. but you're not doing it for the sake of God. In order the students should not lose sight of why they're learning and not lose focus on the fear of God, he would start not with a joke, he would start with Agadata. Because Agadata can inflame the soul with Yiras Shamayim, fear of heaven, and says the Shuvman, that's what was happening. It was Agada, which in that is similar to the second Pshat of Pnei Yehushua. But the purpose, he says, wasn't time to put them in a good mood, because the Torah itself is the greatest tool for that. But it was to make sure Fakir that they should learn in a fruma fashion, not forget the Nois and HaTorah. A very interesting Chassidus Pshat that he said. But upon him, he's going with the Pnei Yehushua that there's no jokes over here. So who disagrees? I said the Meiri, but go on the next page. Number 14, join me in number 14. Join me in number 14 is Keser Shem Tov. In Keser Shem Tov, this is Keser Shem Tov is a collection of the Baal Shem Tov's Torahs. This one is from one of the greatest students of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polna'a. No, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polna'a. And he has a number from the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, which by the way was the first Sefer of Chassidus ever printed, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef. And but this he wrote others from Ksoinas Pasim, Ben Peiris Yosef, anything related to the name Yosef. And he quotes from the Baal Shem Tov Nachanand, consistently. The Friedrich Rebbe writes that after the Baal Shem Tov was Nistaluk, so the Baal Shem Tov's son Reb Tzvi became Rebbe for a year, exactly a year. And then it went to the Maggid. But the Friedrich Rebbe says that it wasn't very clear who should succeed the Baal Shem Tov. And it boiled down to the Maggid of Mezrich to the Yaakov Yosef of Polna. So, from the greatest students of the Baal Shem Tov. And in number 14, he says, Shamati, I heard from my master. This is in the Sefer Ben Peiris Yosef, from Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Polna. The Indian of Milsa de Bedichusa, before you learn, because we know the Chayas, Rotze, V'shov, the Chayas, they go up and down. V'ha'adam hu besoid katnus v'gadlus. A person also, you have your moments of katnus, and you have your moments of gadlus. Sometimes the mind is open, everything works, and sometimes es geht nicht im Ganzen. It could be true about davening, it could be true about learning, it could be true in the business office as well. Sometimes you have, or anything in life, sometimes you have es geht. Alt is often, things are open es geht, and other times it's all farkvetch, es geht nicht. A person goes through these periods. But al-idea simcha, through joy, umilsa de bedichusa. Now this was always understood. This Baal Shem was always quoted for Milsa de B'dechusa being literal, as a joke. Yoitz is something funny that makes you laugh. It takes you out from katnus legadlus. When someone's in a farkvetched mood, they hear something, or something funny, it gets you to laugh and you chuckle. It's the greatest therapy. It can possibly remove you from the constraints you were in and put you in a completely different state of mind, state of being. You leave from katnus to gadlus. And now, now you could learn to cleave to God. So the joke is mamish, the way, it's the gateway to get out of the prison cell of farkvetchkeit and to have that expansiveness. And I heard in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, Heni Trei Badchi, because the Baal Shem Tov quotes the Gemara in Tainus, the two comedians, Shahoyu Mepakchin Sar Ha'ad Meb'Chusa. Right, that Gemara is talking literals, jokes. The Gemara we saw number 11 in Tainus, which is referring to meant jokes. They would remove people's pain through milsa de b'dichusa. And what happened when they made people happy? It wasn't stam they made people happy. Now those people could finally serve God. Va'oz, they were able to come close to the Eibishter. So these comedians, when you put a smile on someone's face, it's not just from a frown to a smile. You change that person's life. The person can now can live the life of a Yid. You're giving him his Judaism. Yeah.
Briefly, that we find the Indian of Yiddishkeit only before Torah. Why don't we find it before Tefillah, which also has to be, you have to be Hashem Simcha. Why don't we find this Indian doing the joke, or whatever you want to call it, before
I think before every minyan, people walk around and schmooze, no? I think it happens there.
During minyan too?
Why is it only before?
I would say, as a Lubavitcher, I would say that the learning of Chassidus itself can can accomplish the same thing. But you're right. You know what? Maybe a little chuckle before davening is what many people need. It's a good point. It's a good point. It requires further investigation. Continues the Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, and that's pshat. Vayikach es shnei nor. Avram took his 2 lads and his son Yitzchak. What does that mean? Yitzchak refers to laughter. Al yidei atzchoik, through laughter, l'shem shamayim. Schoik is when you stam laughing. You know the difference of schoik and schoikes? Schoik is when you laugh stamazoi. Schoik is when you're laughing, but it's a Jewish laugh. It's fine. It's for the sake, it's all within the realm of Torah and mitzvahs. You know what happens then? You can uplift the years of your youth as well. You can uplift the years of your youth. That's right, you took the shnei na'ar, shnei means years, not just 2, it means the years. You want to have the years of your youth with you. You got to laugh. You got to serve the you got to have that chiddush chuckle, chiddush smile. You got to have that bit of Jewish humor.
And sugar-free.
And similar, okay, that's really fine. Fascinating. Vayika, that's how you get the years of your youth with you. So the Baal Shem Tov is pretty clear. He's talking about he's definitely not learning that it's Haggadah like the Tshuva Me'ava. He says clearly it's Choik. Also, the Pnei Yeshua's first word, that it was a sharp, cute Torah word. L'chayr, that's not either the Baal Shem Tov's take. Because he quotes the Gemara Tainus of the 2 Badchim, that literally Badchonis. It sounds from the Baal Shem Tov was literally a joke. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya says the same thing. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya famously in Perek Zion says, he's talking about klippas noiga, items that receive their chayas from a level which is a mixture of good and bad. Any item that receives the chayas from klippas noiga, right now it's like parav. It's not good, it's a mix. It has potential to go both ways. If you use the item for negativity, you're sending it down into negativity. If you use it for the good, you uplift it. And the Alter Rebbe gives a few examples. He says, like a milsa dibedichusa, like a joke before you learn. And the Alter Rebbe says it's a joke, it's parav, it's klippas noiga. The Alter Rebbe clearly is not learning his divrei Haggadah, that's Torah. The Alter Rebbe is clearly not learning that either pshat to the Pnei Yeshua was that it's Torah. The Alter Rebbe says, no, it's klippas noiga. Torah is kedusha. The Alter Rebbe said it's a joke. But if the reason you're doing it is to open up the minds of the students, like Rashi said in the Gemara in Shabbos, was to open up their minds, then it becomes holy. You uplift it. So Alter Rebbe is also very clear. Now the Pnei Yeshua had a big kasha though, because the Gemara said in number 1, the way to come to halacha or to shchina is not schoik and not kalas roish and not dvarim and not sicha. And the Pnei Yeshua said a joke, against all those 4 X's. So you'll have to say that's talking about, you stop joking for no purpose, but when the laughter, if someone's in a harsh mood and you want them to laugh in order to uplift their spirits so they could learn or daven, then it becomes part of the learning and davening. So the Pnei, it's like Simcha Shal Mitzvah. So the Pnei Yeshua doubted that. However, if you look in Rashi, there's a Mefurish Rashi that sounds like the Alter Rebbe, because Elisha, prior to his prophecy, what did he need? Music. What's the mitzvah in that? What music were they playing? They were singing Daled Bavas. What mitzvah was it? Rashi there, I don't have the paper, Rashi says, since Elisha was using the music to help his mood to get prophecy, it became Simcha Shal Mitzvah. There's nothing clear. Rashi's black and white. In fact, it's a little bit of a pella why the Pnei Yeshua doesn't quote that Rashi. Rashi says very clearly that just like by the music, because the purpose was to get him to prophecy, that's Simcha Shal Mitzvah. So if you use a joke to help you learn, it's Simcha Shal Mitzvah. It's mamash the same thing.
You find also Rashi in Chumash where it says by Torah, "Lo suma d'lasos." So Rashi brings down you're not allowed to read or have any activity with a Torah. But if the purpose is to see how bad it is, so you can be mechanech children like other people, then you have
right, lahav and lahiris. Yeah, exactly.
In and of itself is wrong, but if the tachlis is for mitzvah, so you can do it.
Right, the ends justify the means. Exactly. Yeah, wonderful, exactly. Who else supports the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov? Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. In number 16, it's a fasting Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. In his Sefer Tiferes Yonasan, which is the easiest of all his Sfarim. His Sfarim are quite complicated, but Tiferes Yonason is very interesting tidbits on Chumash. On Parashas Re'eh, he says like this, number 16. V'nir, it seems to me, the Isa B'Gemara, number 16. Regilun Hayoloimer, they used to say in the days of the Kadmonim, in days gone by, before learning, they would say Milsa Dibedichusa. Now he says in days gone by, sounds like in his times it wasn't so fashionable. Even though Rabbi Yonason had a great sense of humor. Right, when he was a kid, his mother... When he was a kid, his mother had made chicken for Shabbos. He was hungry Friday afternoon. So he went and he took a pulka. And his mother later comes in the kitchen. Oh, who took the pulka? What happened? What happened? Rabbi Yonason, what are you screaming about? What's going on? She said, the chicken's missing a pulka. So he said, no, some chickens only have one leg. Hold on. So a couple days later, they're walking down the road, him and his mother, and they see there was a chicken that was standing on one leg. So he told his mother, you see, the chicken has one leg. So the mother clapped, and the other leg came down. He said, you should have clapped Friday afternoon in the house. Anyhow, yeah, he had a great sense of humor. But he says, in days of old, they say, he says, in the third line, to explain poetically, like, well, why? Why do you start with a joke? So he says, the Gemara says in Sukkah, Sichas chulin shel talmidei chachamim tzrichin limud, a famous expression. A Talmud Chacham says any expression, you have to study it. Right now, everything a Talmud Chacham says carries weight. Everything is calculated and deliberate. Because of Kedushas Yisrael, according to the holiness of a Jew, it's also to speak Sichas chulin klal. You can't stam say. So then where do jokes come in? If a Talmud Chacham really has to be so careful with every word, that even his sichas chulin, his casual talk, needs to be studied, so how do jokes play a role? He says, Be'emes, I'll tell you, Mipnei ma tiknu lasuach. Why is it? There's a takana, he says, there's a takana. A chiyuv from the rabbis to say milsa dibedichusa before you learn. That's why every rabbi starts with a joke. It's mamish, it's a takana. It's an enactment. You got to start with a joke. Raki says, the Isa, he says, you have to know like this. By all mitzvahs tiknu chachamim, the rabbis established to give a chelik to the samach mem. There's something called bribing the Satan. It comes from the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. The carbon to the azazel that was brought on Yom Kippur. You think the Satan is going to allow the service of Yom Kippur to go through? He'll instigate in heaven, cause the Kohen Gadol to die on the spot. I don't think he could do anything. He's not going to allow it to go. So he needs to get something that'll satisfy him. So the carbon which is thrown off the cliff, now it's not a carbon to Satan, God forbid. Like many people hear this Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer and they think that it's Christian and they misconstrue or whatever. Awful. No, sorry, it's obviously to the Eibishter. The point is that when you give something to the Eibishter, but the Samach Mem gets fooled by it or he gets some energy from it, then it's giving the dog a bone. It's giving the dog a bone. He says, don't you know that by tefillin, the little hair that sticks out of the tefillin, right in the front of the tefillin shorosh, it's from a calf. The cyrus need to be megulin ksat, it's from a calf. So then the Satan sees, that's from an egel. So for God, it reminds him of the golden calf. You know what? Wear your tefillin. I'm happy for you to wear tefillin because it reminds Hashem of the golden calf. And it does. It does. But it's still worth it to wear tefillin. Now, just get rid of the hair. No, then the Satan will instigate and somehow will lose tefillin completely. It's the best possible, the result that we're able to get. So you have to have a little of the sar hanging out. The Satan can have his bone, you give the dog a bone. He says, when you learn, the sitra achra gets nothing. How come the Satan isn't coming here making sure somehow disturbing the shir? You know why? Because he looks, he says, it's one big joke. You say a joke before you learn, the Satan's like, it says by the Haggadah, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Tarfon, the Mesubim B'Bnei Brak. They were reclining in Bnei Brak. If they were officially going to have this incredible Seder together, the Satan would never allow it. But there was an excuse. We're going to chill in Bnei Brak. We're Mesubim. We're reclining. The Chidor writes a similar idea to this. That we're reclining in Bnei Brak. The Satan doesn't get in the way. You give the Satan a little bone, he doesn't get in the way. That is the purpose of a milsa de b'dechusa. So he said it's a joke. If he was like the Pnei Yehushua, the Satan's getting nothing. What, Agadata? He doesn't want Agadata. He wants a good joke. So you have Rabbi Yonas and Eibeshitz, you have the Baal Shem Tov, you have the Alter Rebbe. Okay, fine, granted. Yeah, very different reasons. And the other side, you have the Pnei Yehushua, and you have the Tshuva Ma'ava. Jump to number 13 for a second. I have to always throw Rabbi Nachman Azaria Fano has to get involved in the mix.
It's been a while.
Now, I think that Rabba had a sense of humor already from a previous Gilgul. There's a fellow in Sefer Shoftim called Ivtzon. Ivtzon was a shofet. So the Gemara in Baba Basra says his Boyaz, the famous Boyaz who married Rus. It says about this Ivtzon, he had 30 sons and 30 daughters. But all of them died. And the Gemara in Baba Basra says, Al Shahoya HaKoira, because he called Manoach Kudna. Who's Manoach? Manoach is the father of Shimshon. At this point, Manoach did not have any children. And Ivtzon, whose Boyaz, had 60 children. And he made 60 weddings. He never invited Manoach to one wedding. Not one. And he said the reason is, he said that infertile mule will never invite me back to a wedding because he has no kids of his own. So the Mefarshim explain he knew that Manoach coming to the wedding would be a stab in the heart for Manoach. Another wedding of him, another, and Manoach had no kids of his own. If he invites him, he's going to have to come. If he comes, the guy's going to hate being there, so I'll do him a favor and not invite him. But the line that Ivtzon pulled out was this infertile mule, this kudna, he's never going to reciprocate and invite me to his weddings. But because of that, all of Ivtzon's children died. And he comes back as Rabba. And that's why Rabba, we saw, had 60. Number 8 in Moed Katan, Rabba had 60 Avelusin, just like Ivtzon had. He was a Gilgul. But just like Ivtzon had these sharp comments, so did Rabba. Then there was Avdon ben Hillel Apirasoni. He's a guy who comes up in Shoftim just for Kamal Psukim. He had 40 sons and 30 grandchildren. He came back as Rav Chisda. And like the Gemara said, Rav Chisda had 60 weddings and Rabba had 60 Avelusin. That both of them were Gilgul of one of the Shoftim. But Rabba is a Gilgul of Ivtzon, whose Boyaz, who suffered 60 Avelusin first time round, so to second time round. But you see, first time round, he was throwing out sharp, humorous comments, and his back is Rabba. His back is Rabba doing the same. Now, in number 17 is the mimer that every chosin says by a wedding, L'cha Doidi. Maybe you remember from the mimer, there's something that the Rebbe has, the Friedrich Rebbe have, that comes from the Mittler Rebbe, from his Teres Chaim. In number 17, V'hinei behold, Hamoshel Harishin. Between a chosin and kala, first, you do the badekan, which is a external hashpah, and later on there's an internal hashpah. And the mimer brings a moshel from hashpah of a master to a student. Rebbe and a student also has there's two stages. First, the Rebbe gives something over externally, and then internally. The Seder Hashpah is like the Razal say, before the rabbis open, or before you open a shir to the rabbis, you say a joke, and the rabbis have to laugh. But if the rabbis don't laugh, you do a different joke. You got to keep going till the rabbis laugh. And at the end, you sit be'eim pasuk b'shmait. Because the milsa de b'dichusa before learning, and the Rebbe says this is the same idea, sichas chulun of chachamim, that need to be studied, like Rabbi Yonasan equated it. That's chitzonius. The milsa de b'dichusa, it's not, you're not giving someone, really food for thought. It's not really internal. It's something cute to cause them to laugh. Omnam, however, hashpah, so this hashpah it's a preparation to the hashpah pnimis, which is the halacha. But you dafka need the joke first. Just like by the chos and kala, first you have the external, and then you have the inter. So to here, dafka al yedei, dafka through the joke, nasa psichas halev v'amoyach shel Talmud. Like Rashi said on the Gemara, the joke was not for Rabba. The joke was for the students to open up the mind and the heart that he should be a keli to receive the hashpah pnimis. The vart is, and like it says later that mimer, when you hear a joke and you laugh, the laughter is not the joke just triggers a part inside of you, the tainug inside of you, to be awakened, and you laugh. When you enjoy an intellectual idea, your enjoyment is completely hinged to an intellectual idea. It's called a tainug murkav. It rides upon the intellectual idea, so it never can completely surpass it. Whereas a joke, the laughter is well beyond the material of the joke. Right? A little joke and you just laugh and laugh. The joke could have been foolish and corny. It's not tainug murkav. The joy does not ride, it's not hinged, it's not limited to the joke. The joke just triggers the tainug inside of you. And when the enjoyment is awakened, the learning is ba'if and acher. Like the Gemara says, a person should always learn b'makam shalib b'chafetz, where you desire. When your desire is awakened, and you have an enjoyment, which is what a joke accomplishes, then the seichel works ba'if and acher legamri. So you have the Rebbe's Maimer saying the same thing. It's literally a joke. This is the path of Chassidus. This is the understanding. Despite the Pnei Yeshu and the Tshuva Ma'ava, find there on their side. On the other hand, we have Rabbi Yonas Eibeshitz, the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe, the Rebbe. There is a sikha. We'll just end with this. That why is it the Gemara says Rabba, is always Rabba saying the joke, saying that the Alter Rebbe has the version of Rava. Rabbeinu Chananel in Psachim has the version Rava. By the way, the Tshuva Me'ava also in his version had Rava. There's a Yalkut Shemoni that has Rava, granted, but most say it's Rabba. You see, the Pnei Yeshua connected that it's Rabba, because that Rabba would often sharpen his student Abaya. Most texts have Rabba, so why would the Alter Rebbe take this uncommon version? So the Rebbe learns that both Rabba and Rava actually did. They're both true. They're both true. And probably many more did as well. But there's a chiddush both in Rabba and Rava. The reason why the Gemara would have said it about Rabba or about Rava is because there's a major chiddush that either of these people would have done it. Rabba loy pasuk puma megirsa. Rabba never stopped learning for a moment. Rabba never stopped learning for a moment. So you would not expect that he would say, he would be the last person to allow himself to say it has no place. The Gemara in Bab Metzia says his lips never stopped learning. The Gemara in end of Shabbos, by the way, says that on Shabbos afternoon, Rabba would take a child or grandchild and have him slide on the back of an animal and play with his kids. He would play with the Einiklach on Shabbat. The Gemara discusses the animals, Muktzah, how was he allowed to do it? But it says Rabba would take this child and have him slide on the slope of the back of the animal. So you say, okay, maybe Rabba was still learning while he did that, right? Still muttering. Right, you know the people that are always muttering? Got to throw in one joke, right? There's a guy, he's always learning. Anyhow, one night his wife wants to go out. And she tells him, listen, just three things, that's it. Can you do three things? Of course. She said, number one, I'm leaving the milk on the stove. Once it boils, move it. I can't have it burn over. Number two, the baby's in the vigila. The baby cries. I want you to shake the, rock, thank you, rock the vigila. And number three, I know you're hungry, but in the fridge, in the bowl there's rat poison, don't eat it. No problem. She goes out. He takes his sefer. Now, he puts his chair next to the stove, so he's right next to the milk, so the moment he hears it boiling. The problem is the baby's on the other side of the room. So he ties a string between the vigila and his foot. The baby cries, so just move his leg. And he's learning. All of a sudden the baby was sleeping, right? The baby starts shrieking out of nowhere. He shakes, and he's flustered. He jumps up, and of course, with his foot, he pulled the string. The whole vigil is turned over. The baby's nebuch on the floor. He runs to the baby. While that happens, the milk has boiled over, so the whole stove is covered with milk. And lo and behold, he hears the key in the door. Right, his wife's coming in. He's like, oh, no. So he quickly puts the baby back in the vigil, and he runs to bed. And he's lying there. She comes in. She sees the baby's on the floor crying, on the wiggle crying. The milk is all over the house. She runs to the room and she sees he's lying in bed. She starts screaming. He says, I only have a couple hours to live. I ate the rat boys. Anyhow, so you can say, You know, what makes a joke funny is the truth. There's so much truth to that. Anyhow, so you'll say, as Rabba was having that baby slide on the back of the animal, maybe he was muttering Torah. Fine. But what about the joke? How was he saying a joke? So that would be fuel for the Pnei Shu and the Tshuva Me'ava, that this wasn't a joke, it was just another part of Torah. But the Rebbe learns, no, this is precisely why the Gemara chose Rabba. To teach you that even Rabba, he never stopped learning, knew it's imperative. It's negaya the learning of him and definitely the students as well, to start with the milsa de b'dechusa. It becomes your stepping stool for the shir to be successful. Exactly, part of the mitzvah itself, right. Rava, the Gemara says in Baba Basra that where Rava taught, it was like eating fatty flesh. Rava's yeshiva, the shiurim were like fatty flesh. Rava's shiurim were great. They were wonderful. They were delicious. It was like eating fatty flesh, the Gemara says. Now, fatty flesh makes you happy. Right? Ein simcha. That means Rava's shiurim themselves will put you in a good mood. So you would think Rava doesn't need to say a joke. The students need to be put in a good mood. His shir would do that. The chiddush is even Rava who realized the shir will be exciting, you still need a joke before. That's the chiddush of Rabba. Each one has a chiddush. So the Rebbe says, in the times of the Gemara, you had many people that were Torah Yom Nosei that learned an entire day, right? So they needed to be told that even Rabba would take a moment to say a joke. It's important, it's imperative. But for Rava's vart, that was less of a chiddush. So that's why the version of the Gemara was Rabba, because that was more of a chiddush for the people then. But says the Rebbe, when Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya, the law of someone who's Taras Nosa doesn't apply anymore. We don't have today anyone whose learning is completely their occupation. People learn a lot, Baruch Hashem, right? But not Taras, not to that degree. No one today could say about themselves that loy pasuk, but never stop learning. So therefore, if you're stopping to learn anyways, then you don't need a big justification to say a little joke before you learn. But the din of Rav applies today, because many people give exciting shiurim today. And they could think, I don't need to give a joke. No, the chiddush is even then you have to give. That's why the Alter Rebbe changed to Rava. That was the Rebbe's insight by a Fabrengen. Very interesting. Anyhow, Chaver, thank you very much for the birthday celebrations. I wish everybody a gewaldige year, much hatzlacha. Thank you very much. This is very nice, very nice. I appreciate it. Amen, amen, amen.